Have you ever been humiliated in front of a crowd by the very people who once called you a colleague? Clara Vaughn, 32 years old, dressed in a slightly worn beige blouse, with her hair neatly tied low, as usual walked through the marble lobby of St. James and Rowe Capital, not to her desk this time. She was in handcuffs, and the entire building was watching her, like a breaking scandal had just crashed through the skylight. The marble floor mirrored a figure, not that of a diligent analyst, but of a criminal caught red-handed. Bewildered eyes, mixed with a hint of satisfaction, followed her every step. The space, once filled with laughter over shared birthday cake, now held only silence and venomous whispers. Look at that. Miss Perfect Clara turned out to be a total fraud. Chad Whitley, the marketing manager, with a Rolex and an ever-running mouth, muttered loud enough for Clara to hear. Across the room, Alyssa Davenport, the team lead in a crisp Dior blazer and deep red lipstick, folded her arms and signaled the security guard. Don't let her take anything. People like her always have somewhere to hide evidence. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't cry, didn't lower her gaze. She held her head high, her eyes locked onto the elevator doors. Eyes that, if anyone had dared to look closer, carried something colder than the steel cuffs around her wrists, absolute clarity. In less than a minute, a woman who had spent 5 years with the company, who had rushed to finish reports at midnight, who stayed late when the rest of the team had gone home, had been reduced to a symbol of betrayal. No one asked questions. No one stood up for her. And perhaps that was the most painful part. But what no one knew was the woman they dragged away like a criminal wasn't just carrying silence. She was carrying the truth. And that truth would make every one of them pay. What you just witnessed may feel like a scene from a movie, but it's the beginning of a brutal journey. Clara Vaughn, a woman who once seemed ordinary, is about to step into the shadows where no one believes in her, but where she will make an entire system fall to its knees when the light of truth breaks through. People often overlook the quiet ones. Clara Vaughn was never the center of attention in meetings. She didn't fight to speak, didn't raise her hand during heated debates, and had no talent for flattering the higher-ups. But she always arrived early, stayed late, combed through every line of data in the report system, careful down to the last comma. What no one knew was that after 6 p.m., while her colleagues left the glass building of St. James and Rowe for rooftop dinners in upscale restaurants, Clara boarded Train 6 to Queens, where her mother Elizabeth lay motionless in bed with a quiet heart monitor glowing beside her. Clara cared for her mother as if that were the sole reason she existed, and perhaps it really was. At the office, Clara was seen as outdated, not because of her age, but because her simplicity made others uncomfortable. In a world where everything needed to be polished, Clara was the smudge they didn't want to see. Alyssa Davenport, head of finance and a Wharton alum, was the kind of woman people looked up to, sharp-tongued, impeccably dressed. But behind that perfection was something else: zero tolerance for anyone who didn't reflect her image. Clara, with her worn loafers, plain canvas bag, and neatly tied hair, was an eyesore to Alyssa. "I don't understand why this company keeps people like her. She looks like she stepped out of 2005, Alyssa once said during a meeting with her mic conveniently off. As for Chad Whitley, the man who constantly bragged about his Wall Street connections, he saw Clara as the perfect target for office jokes. He often read out minor spreadsheet mistakes, most of which were his own input errors, then turned to quip Clara should have been a librarian. At least there she wouldn't be losing money. Jasmine Liu, a young analyst with a sharp mind and an even sharper stare, could make anyone feel judged with just a glance. One time, She looked Clara up and down and asked, half joking, half serious, "Have you ever left the city, or have you never even owned a passport?" Clara heard everything, but she never responded. She simply looked up, her eyes quiet, not angry, but just enough to make the other person uneasy. Not everyone bullies with words. Some choose a far more dangerous method, pretending you don't exist. Ever since the meeting, where Chad openly mocked the report Clara had spent all night perfecting, the isolation became unmistakable. Team meetings went on without an invitation. Group lunches quietly faded away. Even in shared document emails, the name Clara Vaughn seemed deliberately omitted. Things worsened when Alyssa, the team lead, made a critical mistake. During an internal task, she accidentally granted Clara access to a financial account, one that exposed irregular fund transfers within the system. A day later, the access vanished without a word, and right after that, rumors spread like wildfire. Clara lost $5,000 from the partner fund. Clara got called up by IT. Clara's about to be fired. Clara said nothing, but her eyes tracked every smirk, every accidental whisper. She knew this wasn't random. She knew exactly who was behind it, and she also knew if she reacted too early, they would win. Chad took it as a license to go further. He cornered her by the photocopier, half smirking. "Heard you dipped into company funds? Bold move, Clara. I thought you didn't have it in you." Jasmine walked by, shook her head, voice flat as glass. "At least now, people have a reason to remember your name." Clara placed the stack of papers on the tray and looked up, her eyes locking with theirs. "It's easy to believe what you want to believe," she said, quietly, but the words sliced through the air like a blade. Chad blinked. Jasmine pressed her lips together. Neither said another word. That night, as the office faded under the dim glow of surrounding skyscrapers, Clara sat alone at her desk, scrolling through endless lines of transaction code. For 3 nights, she didn't sleep, checking every timestamp and every action in the system. Finally, she found it. The money was never lost. It was a data entry error caused by none other than Alyssa's careless click. Clara drafted a detailed report and sent it directly to upper management. The next day, an internal email went out. "The matter has been reviewed. No funds are missing. No thank you. No acknowledgement." Alyssa merely glanced at Clara's desk as she passed, muttering, "Just a lucky guess." Clara didn't reply. She opened the next folder. In a place that was supposed to be a professional office, they had turned her into a joke. But even when pushed to the bottom of the trust ladder, Clara never chose retaliation. She chose to work. She chose to endure. And what they didn't know was this: that very silence was the biggest mistake they were making day after day. As Clara prepared a presentation for a major partner conference, she had no idea that the next time she would stand in that room, it would be the moment every person who had turned their back on her would have to face the light of truth. That day, Clara wasn't late. She arrived early, stood before the mirror in the conference room on the 42nd floor, straightened her pale blue blouse, and flipped through the pages of the presentation for the biggest pitch of the year. A quarter of the content had been drafted by her, but as always, Alyssa would be the one standing at the podium. The meeting began. Questions from partners started rolling in. When a representative from the Dorchester Fund raised a sharp inquiry about compliance procedures, Alyssa hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Clara. Clara could have stayed silent, but she didn't. Her voice rang out calm, clear, and firm. "The procedure was revised last quarter. We now use a triple-layer verification platform, and all transactions are time-stamped with encryption." No one interrupted. No one objected. The partner representative nodded in approval. But the moment the meeting ended, Alyssa pulled Clara into the hallway, her tone dropping to a threat. "Don't you ever make me look small in front of a client again. This is a company, not your personal stage," Clara replied gently, without backing down. "I'm just doing my job. If that makes you feel small, maybe the problem isn't me." In that moment, Alyssa said nothing. But it wasn't because she had nothing to say, it was because she had decided to speak in another way. 1 week later, Thursday night, no one saw it coming. The 42nd floor buzzed with the hum of keyboards and sterile white lighting from the ceiling. Clara was reviewing documents for the upcoming month when two men walked in. One of them pulled out an FBI badge. "Clara Vaughn, you are under arrest for suspicion of involvement in international money laundering. Please come with us." The room froze. Chad stopped typing. Jasmine set her espresso cup down as if it had turned to ice. Alyssa stood at the glass office door, arms folded, saying nothing, but her eyes almost glowed. Clara said not a word. She let them cuff her and walk her through the lobby. She walked past dozens of familiar faces, now more distant than ever. Someone whispered, "I knew it." No one stays that quiet unless they've got something to hide. There were no tears on Clara's face, no panic, only a frozen calm, as if she'd touched rock bottom long ago. That night, the evening news exploded. The front pages of major outlets ran with blaring red headlines: "Financial assistant in Manhattan arrested in international money laundering case," accompanied by an old photo of Clara, pale-faced, hair tied, low eyes cast down. And in the small apartment in Queens, Elizabeth, Clara's mother, saw her daughter on the TV screen. She collapsed to the floor before she could even make a call. No one informed Clara. The next day, in a freezing jail cell, Clara sat alone, hair-tangled eyes wide open from a sleepless night. The court-appointed lawyer opened the file, speaking like someone who had seen too many of these cases. "To be honest, you should just take the plea. It'll all be over faster." Clara didn't turn, didn't argue. She responded with just one sentence: "I didn't do it, and I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do." That sentence didn't unlock the bars, but it was the first step marking the start of a journey where Clara would no longer suffer in silence. Beyond those walls, the truth was being strangled. But the truth, when waited for long enough, has a way of rising on its own. The federal women's prison in South Brooklyn wasn't like what you see in movies. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was so quiet it hurt, like the whole place was listening, waiting to see who would break first. Clara Vaughn entered like a ghost. No one welcomed her, no one cared. But no one accepted her either. An old blanket, a rusted metal bed frame, and a new name office girl were all she was given on her first day. She was seen as an easy target. A small, thin, quiet woman, with nothing to protect her except a few traces of intellect in her expression. For someone like Tasha, the unofficial leader of D Block, Clara was the perfect subject to assert dominance. At her first meal, Clara's food tray was slapped to the ground. Tasha laughed loudly. "Princesses don't get special treatment here. Pick that bread up and live like the rest of us." Clara looked down at the mashed potatoes smeared across the concrete floor, then looked Tasha straight in the eye. She didn't shout. She didn't retreat. She knelt, picked up a piece of bread, wiped the dust off with her prison sleeve, and took a bite. The dining hall went silent. Not because she fought back, but because she didn't bother getting angry. And that confused Tasha, a woman who wielded control like a weapon, more than any resistance could have. Clara didn't make friends, but she helped. She wrote letters for those who couldn't write, explained appeal forms, in simple words to women who had never understood the law. She was quiet but present, like a tree growing silently behind bars. One day, a young woman named Carla, barely in her 20s, slipped a neatly folded note into Clara's hand. It was written in rough pencil strokes. "Thank you. My mom says you write better than any lawyer I ever had. We're watching you." Clara read it, folded it back, and for the first time in weeks, she sat upright, as if someone had gently touched a string inside her that had never broken. Tasha didn't stop. Another time, she and her group stole Clara's last clean pair of socks and passed them around like a game. Clara didn't chase them. She stood still, hands in her pockets. When the socks were finally tossed to the ground, she walked over, picked them up, and brushed off the dust. Then quietly said, without looking at anyone, "Thanks for the morning exercise." No one laughed. A few began to nod. Time passed. Clara didn't cry, didn't complain. She lived, she wrote, she helped, and she waited. But even the smallest kindness comes at a cost in a cruel world. Weeks later, an inmate fabricated a story claiming Clara had hidden a razor blade inside a law book. She was thrown into solitary confinement, no warning, no hearing. The tiny isolation cell had white walls, a light that never turned off, and a silence so suffocating it seemed to press down on her chest. Clara sat there for 3 days and nights, not knowing why, not knowing when she'd be released. But in that despair, she noticed something, a floor vent, near the ground, just wide enough, recently unscrewed and clumsily reattached. She didn't act, but she remembered. One day, this might be the way out. Clara didn't know when the truth would speak, but one thing she knew for sure. If no one opened the door, she would find a way to slip through even the narrowest crack. After 3 days in solitary confinement, Clara was returned to the general population. No one asked why she'd been isolated. No one apologized. That was normal here. But for Clara, something had shifted. She didn't speak much, but her eyes had changed. No longer the eyes of someone enduring, but of someone who had seen a crack in the wall. Clara began to observe more closely. She remembered the small air vent in the solitary cell, reinstalled carelessly as if someone had once tried to escape through it. It was small, but not impossible. And more importantly, it connected to a maintenance corridor behind the cafeteria where the trash trucks came every week. She needed 2 things: time and an ally. A week later, during laundry duty, Clara approached Lena, a quiet girl imprisoned for hacking into a bank system. Rumor had it, she once bypassed the firewall of a private Boston bank just to wire $50 to her foster mother battling cancer. "What do you want from me?" Lena asked, not even turning. "I don't want anything. I have evidence, and I need to get out to deliver it to the right hands." Lena was silent for a long time, then exhaled. "Lots of people need to get out for lots of reasons, but you're the first one I believe isn't escaping to disappear." The second person was Roy, a gruff old man, once a plumber imprisoned for assaulting someone in a bar who had insulted him for his skin color. Few knew he had once serviced the drainage systems of one of New York's biggest hotels and could recall every pipe like the back of his hand. Roy eyed Clara with doubt. "You think you're tough enough to survive? If you get caught again, I don't think." "I know." The 3 of them, not from the same world, not imprisoned for the same reasons, began communicating in glances, in folded notes, tucked inside law books, in whispered exchanges over clinking metal utensils and plastic trays. Clara sketched a plan from memory: the vent's dimensions, the path from the kitchen to the waste bay, the truck schedule. Lena tracked camera patterns, timing her observations during guard shift changes. Roy handled the rest, identifying which pipes led to the loading zone and which ones were dead ends. They never used the word escape. They simply called it getting the truth out. One night in their cell, Lena turned and asked softly, "Why are you so sure that once you're out, you'll actually make something happen?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Because I won't let them define me. Not them, not the media, not the ones who laughed when I was dragged away in cuffs." Lena didn't reply, but for the first time, she looked at Clara like someone who had chosen her path and wouldn't turn back. They waited, silently, memorizing every guard's pattern. There was one night supervisor who always dozed off, another who went outside to smoke precisely at 4 a.m. Every piece mattered. No detail was wasted. They didn't have the luxury of mistakes. One misstep, and there would be no second chance. Clara lay on the top bunk, eyes wide open, staring at the peeling ceiling. She wasn't afraid of being caught again. She wasn't afraid of being forgotten. She feared only one thing, that those who had built an entire lie would continue living free, dining in expensive restaurants and smirking at the news about a disgraced assistant. And that fear made it impossible for her to sit still any longer. The following Wednesday morning, the rain poured hard. Clara didn't know if that night would be a success. She only knew this: either she would break out and bring the truth to the world, or die trying. That night, the rain wouldn't stop. Thunder roared like a storm-born prayer for the three people crawling through a narrow, freezing, pitch-black tunnel beneath the federal prison. No one spoke. There was no time for fear. They had only minutes and their entire lives staked on them. Clara led the way, her knees scraped raw, her hands torn open. But she didn't stop. Behind her, Lena counted steps by instinct. Roy wheezed, but kept pace. When they finally made it through the last stretch and tumbled into a pile of damp garbage, behind the loading truck, lightning cracked the sky as if signaling something had changed. The truck rolled forward through the gate. No one noticed. 30 minutes later, they slipped into a public landfill nearly 2 miles from the prison and went their separate ways. Clara didn't look back. She had vowed she wouldn't. Not once. The next morning, in a shabby motel room in the Bronx, Monica Hale opened the door. She didn't speak. She just threw her arms around Clara, clinging as if afraid her old friend might vanish into thin air. "I thought I'd lost you, Monica," whispered her voice, breaking into pieces. Clara didn't cry. She simply placed a cheap plastic phone into Monica's hand and said, "Call the journalist, Evelyn Cross. She's waiting." Evelyn Cross, a veteran reporter for the New York Times, had written on some of the decade's biggest financial scandals, but never had she received a file like this. Dozens of account statements, internal logs with timestamps, email exchanges between departments, and finally, a deleted file restored by Leo Park, a hacker Clara once helped when his sister was facing legal charges. Inside the final folder, a string of emails. Alyssa Chad, 2 senior executives. Subject line: remove Clara from the loop permanently. "Oh my God," Evelyn muttered, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the screen. "Do you even know what you're holding?" "I do," Clara replied. "I lived in it for 3 years. So what do you want now? Expose everything? Hold nothing back." Evelyn wrote for 3 straight days. Leo decrypted fake messages planted on Clara's computer. Monica testified. A renowned lawyer from the Free Press Foundation offered to defend Clara pro bono. By Monday morning, the front page of the New York Times screamed, "The woman cuffed not for a crime, but for finding one." The internet exploded. Major news networks lined up for interviews. The hashtag Justice for Clara trended worldwide. Leaked emails went viral and were then confirmed. Shady transactions tied to Alyssa and Chad were traced back to anonymous Cayman accounts. Federal investigators reopened the case, but this time they didn't come for Clara. They came to request the originals she had kept. At a special press conference, Clara appeared, hair still tied low, wearing a white blouse and a black coat. When asked if she was afraid, she simply answered, "I used to be. But after being arrested, defamed, forgotten. I realized fear means nothing when you've got nothing left to lose. Now, I have only one thing left, the truth." And this time, no one cut her off. No one turned their chair. No one dismissed her. The entire room fell silent, just to hear every word from a woman the world had written off, now pulling an entire system into the light. The court announced the case would be reopened. Clara would be granted the right to speak for herself, and this time, the truth wouldn't stand alone. The federal courtroom was packed. Everyone waited for the moment when the woman once dragged away in handcuffs would rise to expose the truth. Clara didn't hire a media-savvy lawyer. She took the stand herself, in a white blouse, holding account statements, emails, sworn testimonies, and an audio recording of Alyssa saying, "Remove Clara before she finds out about the April contract." The room went dead silent. When the judge asked her to speak, Clara simply said, "I tried to raise my voice, and when no one listened, they created a crime to silence it. But I'm still here not to take revenge, but to make sure no one else stays silent the way I once did." The judge ruled Clara was found not guilty. All involved parties were prosecuted. The corporation was ordered to issue a public apology and fund a whistleblower protection initiative. 1 month later, Clara founded the Phoenix Fund to support those who had been crushed for daring to stand on the side of truth. She didn't go on talk shows. She stayed off the media circuit. Instead, she visited classrooms telling students, "You may lose everything, but if you hold on to the truth, you'll never be the one who truly loses." At one lecture, someone asked her, "Do you hate them?" Clara smiled. "No, I'm grateful to them, because being pushed to the bottom showed me just how far I could rise." Share this story with someone who feels lost. Let them know you don't have to be powerful to do what's right. You just have to refuse to stay silent. If you believe in stories like this, like, comment with how it moved you, and subscribe to the Toch Story channel so you never miss a journey that could touch your heart. Because who knows, the next story might be yours.